The Audacity was aptly named, not for its sleek design, which resembled a toaster someone had tried to fix with a hammer, nor for its groundbreaking technology, which was mostly held together by stubbornness and hope. No, it was the crew, specifically Captain Marlowe Vex, that gave the ship her true character. The kind of character that made you wonder if the airlock would be a better option. "Captain, we're approaching the wormhole temple," announced Leela, the ship's AI navigator, with the enthusiasm of a malfunctioning fridge. She was as close to personality as a set of gears could get, which meant she was mostly deadpan and occasionally sarcastic. "Try not to crash us into anything religiously significant, yeah." Marlowe leaned back in his chair, the leather squeaking like it was protesting his existence. "Relax, Leela. The Xanthians love us. They said it was an honor to have us here. Pretty sure honor in their language translates to unavoidable inconvenience," quipped Thorn, the ship's engineer, as he fiddled with a broken mug. Thorn was the kind of guy you wanted by your side when things went south, if only because he had the uncanny ability to make any situation worse, thus making the original problem seem less daunting by comparison. "Diplomatic relations," Marlowe continued, ignoring Thorn, "are all about showing respect, understanding their culture, and definitely not playing Earth's greatest hits on loop." "What's the worst that could happen?" asked Cass, the communications officer, as she tapped absent-mindedly at her console. She had the look of someone who'd seen the universe's worst and found it too boring to be bothered by. "Well, Cass," Marlowe sighed, "for starters, the Xanthians might find our music offensive." "Offensive? Like, please stop, my ears are bleeding, or we're declaring war on Earth offensive." Hopefully more of the former. The wormhole temple loomed ahead, a swirling vortex of color and light that seemed more like a bad acid trip than a place of worship. It was the Xanthians' most revered site, a sacred space where they communed with the cosmos or whatever they believed was listening. "Looks like a giant cosmic toilet," Thorn muttered, squinting at the view screen. "That's sacrilege," Marlowe chuckled, "but you're not wrong." The Audacity docked without incident, and the crew disembarked to meet their alien hosts. The Xanthians were a peculiar bunch, tall, slender beings with translucent skin that shimmered in the artificial light. They had no mouths, just a series of gill-like slits on their necks, which made communication a bit of a chore. The High Priestess, or whatever they called their leader, greeted them with a gesture that Marlowe hoped was friendly. "Welcome, Earthlings, to the Wormhole Temple," she said through a translator device that made her voice sound like a cross between a drowning cat and a malfunctioning synthesizer. "We are honored by your presence." "Honored," Thorn whispered to Cass, "like a root canal." "We're thrilled to be here," Marlowe replied, flashing a grin that screamed diplomacy over honesty. The Xanthians led the crew through a series of corridors that twisted and turned like the labyrinth of regrets most of the crew carried around in their heads. Every so often, one of the walls would light up with strange symbols, and Marlowe felt like he was in a particularly confusing escape room. "Our temple resonates with the harmonies of the universe," the High Priestess explained, her voice still horrendously robotic. "It is a place of peace and contemplation." "Well, that's one way to put it," Cass said under her breath, eyeing a particularly unsettling mural depicting what could only be described as an interstellar orgy. As they reached the temple's main chamber, the crew was greeted by the sight of a massive structure resembling an organ. Pipes and tubes reached up into the darkness above, and every now and then a note would echo through the room, resonating in their chests like a bad case of indigestion. "It's beautiful," Marlowe lied, trying not to let the dissonant chords make his teeth itch. The High Priestess gestured towards the organ thing. "We believe that the universe communicates through music. Each note you hear is the sound of the cosmos." "Sounds like the universe is tone-deaf," Thorn quipped, earning himself a glare from Marlowe. "We hope you will share your music with us," the High Priestess continued, oblivious to Thorn's commentary. "Oh, we'd love to," Marlowe said, his smile a little too tight. "Cass, why don't you cue up something nice? Cass hesitated, fingers hovering over her console. Captain, are we sure about this? What's the worst that could happen? Marlowe repeated, more to himself than anyone else. The speakers on the Audacity hummed to life, and the strains of an old Earth classic, something with a lot of guitars and a singer who sounded like he'd swallowed a cheese grater, filled the temple. The effect was instantaneous. The Xanthians recoiled as if they'd been struck, their skin flashing through a kaleidoscope of colors that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so terrifying. "Oh," Marlowe said, more to break the awkward silence than anything else, "I guess they really don't like rock and roll." The High Priestess seemed to regain her composure, her skin settling on a deep, unsettling purple. This is not harmony," she stammered through the translator. "It is chaos." "Chaos," Thorne laughed. "Lady, you should hear his karaoke nights." Marlowe shot Thorne a look that could melt steel. "Perhaps we should, try something else," he suggested, nodding to Cass. Cass quickly flipped through her playlist, settling on something softer, a piano piece that was supposed to soothe the nerves. It was the kind of music you'd expect in an old elevator on its last ropes. The Xanthians seemed to calm, their colors fading to a more neutral hue. "This is acceptable," the High Priestess conceded. "Acceptable," Cass repeated, giving Marlowe a look. "Well, it's a start." "A start," Marlowe echoed, wondering how the hell they were going to fix this mess. "Let's keep it that way." Just when things seemed to settle, a deep rumble shook the temple and the organ thing emitted a series of horrible screeches that made even Thorne wince. "What now?" Marlowe groaned as the Xanthians began to panic, their skin shifting with alarming speed. "The temple is reacting," the High Priestess said, her voice rising with a mix of fear and awe. "Your music, it's awakening something," Marlowe cursed under his breath. "Awakening what?" Before the High Priestess could answer, the floor beneath them began to glow, and Marlowe realized they might have just stumbled into something far bigger than a diplomatic faux pas. "Well," Thorne said, grinning despite the chaos, "at least it's not boring." "Never is," Marlowe muttered, as the temple continued to shake, and the crew of the Audacity braced themselves for whatever the universe was about to throw at them next. The Audacity rocked under the tremors, and the crew clung to whatever wouldn't crush them if the gravity decided to take a coffee break. Captain Marlowe Vex, who had mastered the art of maintaining a calm demeanor while internally screaming, looked towards her crew. "All right, folks, seems our interstellar karaoke night has woken up the cosmic neighbors. Suggestions?" Cass, still at her console, raised an eyebrow. "How about mute button?" "Too late for that," Marlowe replied dryly. "But thanks for playing." Thorne, naturally in his element amidst chaos, fiddled with some controls. "Maybe we can reverse the polarity or something. Isn't that what they do in the vids? Reverse the polarity?" Cass scoffed. "This isn't a bad sci-fi flick, Thorne, it's our lives." "Exactly," he replied, with the kind of grin that suggested he'd probably enjoy a bad sci-fi flick. "Which means we have to think outside the script." Rigby, the engineer with a knack for improvising solutions that were just as likely to blow up in their faces, joined the brainstorming session. "We could try and match the temple's frequency. A little cosmic harmony might unpiss off the universe. Or make it worse," Cass pointed out. "Remember that time you tried to fix the engine by syncing it with your guitar amp and we almost ended up as space junk?" "Yeah, but it didn't," Rigby countered, arms crossed. "Almost doesn't count." "All right, enough bickering," Marlowe interjected, her patience wearing thinner than the hull. "We need a real solution before the Xanthians decide we're the universe's worst houseguests." Everyone's attention turned to Sura, their cultural analyst, who had been conspicuously quiet. Sura was the kind of person who could read a species' holy text and reduce it to a side note in a history class. "Sura," Marlowe prompted, "any insight into why our music might be giving them an existential crisis?" Sura gestured to the alien scriptures flickering across the walls, the symbols dancing like they were in on the joke. "The Xanthians believe their temple is a cosmic conductor. They think it keeps the universe in harmony. Our music might be messing with that." Balance? So, we've basically played static on the universe's celestial radio, Cass said. Great. A frantic Xanthian rushed over, presumably to ensure the Earthlings weren't about to obliterate their sacred space. Its skin flickered a nervous shade of teal as it spoke through the translator. The disturbance is growing. You must cease your tones. Working on it, Marlowe assured with a diplomatic nod, while mentally cursing the day she ever agreed to this mission. We need to find a way to counteract the music, something that won't turn us all into cosmic confetti. As they brainstormed, the temple shuddered again, the organ-like structure groaning ominously. It was as if the universe itself was asking them to shut the hell up. Maybe we need to play something that counteracts the chaos, Sura suggested. A melody that's more in line with their beliefs. Like what? Rigby asked. Xanthian elevator music. If it saves our skins, I'm game for anything, Cass said. Even if it sounds like a cat's got a death grip on the bagpipes. Marlowe considered the walls, now pulsing with strange energy. If these symbols are part of their harmony system, maybe we can translate them into music they find palatable. Right? Thorne said, his voice laced with skepticism. And how do you suppose we do that without a Rosetta Stone for cosmic tunes? Rigby snapped his fingers. I might have something. If I can hook into the temple's frequency, maybe I can isolate a pattern and recreate it using the ship's sound system. That's a big if, Cass warned. If it fails, we could end up making things worse. Can't get much worse, Marlowe said, her optimism hanging on by a thread. Rigby, do it. Everyone else, keep those Xanthians calm. Rigby dove into his work, wielding wires and circuits like a wizard with an attitude problem. Cass and Thorne worked on trying to communicate assurance to the Xanthians, whose skin continued to flash an alarming disco of colors. You know, Thorne said offhandedly to Cass, this reminds me of a party I went to once. The kind with punch that tastes like industrial cleaner. You're a real comfort, Thorne, Cass replied dryly, as she attempted to explain through gestures that everything was under control. The Xanthian gave her a look that screamed, I don't believe you, but maybe that was just its default expression. Meanwhile, Rigby was in his element, splicing wires and coaxing the ship's sound system to play nice with the alien tech. All right, he announced, I've isolated a pattern. It's like a cosmic lullaby or something. Let's see if we can put the universe back to sleep. He flipped a switch and the speakers hummed to life. A soft, ethereal melody filled the temple, a stark contrast to the earth-shattering rock they'd played earlier. It was soothing, like the sound of rain on a steel roof or the steady hum of a ship that hadn't completely fallen apart. The Xanthians paused, their skin settling into a calm, pale blue. The temple itself seemed to respond, the vibrations easing into a gentle rhythm. Even the organ thing quieted, its shrieks softening to a low hum. Looks like you found the right station, Cass said, relief evident in her voice. The High Priestess approached them, her expression unreadable but the translator device doing its best to convey gratitude. You have restored the harmony. The temple is pleased. Glad to hear it, Marlowe replied, though her neck muscles were still tense enough to snap guitar strings. We apologize for the disruption. Our music isn't usually so world-ending. The High Priestess tilted her head, the Xanthian version of a nod. Your presence has taught us much about your species. Hopefully not enough to blacklist us from intergalactic invites, Thorne muttered, earning him a nudge from Cass. As the immediate threat subsided, Marlowe took stock of the situation. They'd managed to avert disaster, at least for now. But the lingering question remained. What in the universe had they really stumbled upon here? Captain, Sura said quietly, this temple might be more than just a relic of their beliefs. If it can be influenced by sound, what else might it be capable of? Marlowe considered this. There was potential for great power here, potential that could be exploited or destroyed. But that was a question for another day, preferably one with less existential dread. Let's not stick around to find out, Marlowe decided, clapping her hands together as if to brush off the weight of the last few hours. Leela, bring up the ship systems. We're getting out of here. "Aye, Captain," Leela's voice came through, as ever slightly mocking, as if the AI had been quietly judging their antics from a distance. "Preparing for departure. Try not to crash into anything on the way out." The crew made their way back to the Audacity, the ship's familiar, battered corridors welcoming them with the scent of recycled air and a hint of despair. As they prepared to leave, the Xanthians watched from the docking bay, their eyes, or whatever passed for them, fixed on the strange visitors from Earth who'd managed to both disrupt and restore their sacred space in one evening. "Well, that was fun," Thorne said, strapping in with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "Next time, can we just skip to the drinking part of diplomatic missions? If there is a next time," Cass added, "I vote we send a mixtape ahead. You know, avoid any more universal incidents." Marlowe let out a laugh, the sound more like a crack in the tension than actual humor. "Noted. But for now, let's get this toaster back in the air." As they lifted off from the wormhole temple, Marlowe couldn't help but glance back at the swirling vortex of color and light, the swirling cosmic toilet that nearly flushed them all. She'd filed this one under lessons learned, alongside "Don't let Thorne fix anything important" and "Never underestimate the power of a good sound system." "Destination, Captain?" Leela asked as they cleared the docking bay and headed into the void. "Anywhere but here," Marlowe replied, settling into her chair with a sigh. "And keep the music off for now. Let's not tempt fate." With that, the Audacity shot into the stars, leaving behind the wormhole temple and its cosmic mysteries. The universe was vast, unpredictable, and not always friendly. But for now, it was just another day in the life of Captain Marlowe Vex and her irreverent crew. "Hey, Marlowe," Thorne called from his station. "Next time we have a mission like this, remind me to call in sick, all right?" Marlowe grinned. "You'd miss all the fun." "Yeah, well," Thorne shrugged, "I'm starting to think I prefer my chaos a bit more." Contained. As the ship thrummed steadily into the unknown, Marlowe couldn't help but agree. But then again, who knew what fresh brand of chaos awaited them just beyond the next star? The thrill was in not knowing. And with this crew, there was never any shortage of surprises. The Audacity limped through the void like a drunk trying to remember where he parked his dignity. After the close call at the wormhole temple, the crew was riding the high of survival, which was, as usual, promptly followed by the low of "what the hell do we do now?" "Not that I'm complaining," Thorne drawled from his post, "but do we have an actual plan, or are we winging it until something breaks?" Marlowe glanced over, brow furrowed in the kind of deep concentration one reserves for their tax returns, or choosing between equally unappetizing meal options. "I'm thinking we avoid any more cosmic karaoke until further notice, and maybe the Xanthians, too." "Good call," Cass chimed in from the console, fingers deftly tapping commands that probably wouldn't work. The ship systems were as cooperative as a cat at bath time. "But unless we want to end up as space debris, we should check in with Rigby. See if he's decoded anything useful from that temple." There was a collective groan as everyone considered the implications of Rigby's solo work. The man had a talent for turning tech into ticking time bombs, but desperate times and all that. "Let's go see what our resident mad scientist is brewing up," Marlowe said. They made their way to the engine room, dodging loose wires, random sparks, and the occasional unsettling noise. Their ship wasn't a haven, it was a hazard with a navigation system. Rigby was deep in his element, surrounded by screens displaying the alien language that might as well have been hieroglyphics for all the good they did. His hair was wild, eyes wilder, a sure sign he was onto something. "Please tell me you've deciphered something that doesn't involve us exploding," Marlowe said by way of greeting. "Depends on your definition of exploding," Rigby replied, flashing a grin that was all teeth and no comfort. "I found a pattern in the symbols. It's like a code or a key. Could be a way to control the temple or at least not piss it off." Cass crossed her arms, distinctly unimpressed. "And what happens if you get it wrong? We end up as cosmic confetti," Rigby shrugged. "That's what test runs are for. Besides, it's not like we have a lot of options. Sura, who had been lurking in the background with the ease of someone used to being ignored, piped up. The Xanthians might not take too kindly to us fiddling with their sacred space again. Yeah, well, they're not exactly rolling out the welcome mat, Thorn retorted. Alien hospitality's overrated anyway. Marlowe rubbed her temples, feeling a headache forming that no amount of aspirin could cure. Okay, new plan. We keep a low profile, figure out this code, and try not to land ourselves in an interstellar incident. Again. Low profile, Thorn chuckled, shaking his head. You mean like the last time we went low profile and ended up leading a parade on Gliese 581G? Hey, Marlowe shot back. I thought it was a protest. Potato, potato. The ship shuddered, a gentle reminder that they were one bad decision away from becoming a cautionary tale. The Xanthians had tightened their grip, broadcasting a firm stay-put message that left little room for polite interpretation. They've locked us in their version of a cosmic timeout, Cass noted dryly, reading the latest communique from the Xanthians. Guess they didn't appreciate our little musical number. Or maybe they just have terrible taste, Thorn suggested. Has anyone considered they just like bad music? If we're done with the comedy routine, Marlowe cut in, let's focus on not making things worse. They dispersed, each returning to their stations with the kind of weary determination only a lost cause could muster. Back on the bridge, Marlowe and Cass tried to come up with a plan that didn't involve begging or brute force. Neither had proven particularly effective in their line of work. Any progress on decoding those symbols? Marlowe asked, staring out at the endless void as if it held answers instead of just more questions. Cass shook her head. Still working on it. It's like trying to solve a crossword without any clues, or trying to figure out why Rigby still insists on wearing those ridiculous goggles, Thorn added, returning to his favorite pastime of bothering everyone else. Hey, Rigby's voice came over the intercom, defensive and just a touch smug. These goggles saved my eyes more times than I can count. Besides, you try working with alien tech that might explode at any second. Fair enough, Marlowe conceded. Just keep at it. We're counting on you to get us out of this mess. The day stretched into night, though time was a flexible concept in space. The crew settled into a routine of cautious optimism and strategic avoidance of each other's personal space. It wasn't much, but it was better than sitting around waiting for the universe to implode. Sura, in the meantime, had taken to analyzing the Xanthian culture with a fervor usually reserved for conspiracy theorists and rabid fans of reality TV. She'd covered the briefing room with sketches and notes, trying to find a way to appeal to the Xanthians beyond their shared dislike of human music. Anything useful? Marlowe asked, poking her head in to check on the progress. Sura looked up from her mountain of data, eyes wide and slightly manic. I think their entire belief system hinges on harmony. If we can convince them we're not a threat, maybe even an asset, they might let us move freely. How do we do that when they are dead set on seeing us as a cosmic joke? Thorn shot from the doorway, clearly eavesdropping. Cass entered, crossing her arms and nodding towards Sura's elaborate mess of notes. You've got your work cut out for you. But if anyone can convince them otherwise, it's you. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Sura replied, not entirely sarcastic but close. I'll see what I can do. Hours later, with a plan that was more hope than strategy, they gathered on the bridge. Rigby had made progress on the temple's code, enough to make Marlowe cautiously optimistic about their chances. All right, team, Marlowe said, rallying the troops with the conviction of someone who wasn't entirely convinced. We're going to get out of this. Sura, work on the cultural angle. Rigby, focus on the tech. Thorn, Cass, keep the ship from falling apart and try not to antagonize anyone. Got it, Captain, Cass replied, with a salute that was more cheek than respect. We'll keep the peace. Or at least the illusion of it. Thorn's grin was sharp and mischievous. And if that fails, there's always Plan B. Plan B? Running like hell. Marlowe couldn't help but chuckle at that one. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. But the universe wasn't in the habit of listening to hope, and as they worked through the night, the Xanthians made their discontent known. Rigby's attempts to decode their technology were met with interference, a digital blockade that threatened to undo their progress. "Looks like they've caught on to our little game," Rigby said, frustration evident in his voice. "We're going to have to get creative if we want to crack this." "Creative?" Cass asked, a skeptical eyebrow raised. "You mean like that time you tried to fix the hyperdrive with duct tape and determination?" "Hey, it worked, didn't it?" Rigby retorted. "Mostly." "Mostly doesn't cut it," Marlowe interjected, her patience worn as thin as the ship's hull. "We need results, not improvisation." Rigby sighed, shoulders sagging under the weight of expectation and the pressure of impending doom. "I know, Captain. I'll figure it out." "See that you do," Marlowe replied, though her tone held more understanding than command. It was an impossible situation, and they were all just trying to make it through. As Rigby returned to his work, Sura approached Marlowe, a stack of papers in her hands and determination in her eyes. "I've got a proposal." A way to show the Xanthians were not a threat. Marlowe glanced over the notes, brow furrowed as she tried to make sense of the academic jargon that filled the pages. "And you think this will work?" "It's a long shot," Sura admitted, "but it's better than waiting around for them to decide our fate." Marlowe nodded, appreciating the effort and the optimism that Sura managed to maintain, even in the face of near-certain failure. "All right, prepare your presentation. We'll give it a shot." By the time they reconvened, the crew was running on adrenaline and caffeine, fueled by the kind of desperation that only space travel could provide. Sura stood at the head of the table, ready to present her plan. "Here's the deal," she began, confidence in her voice despite the odds. "We're going to appeal to the Xanthian sense of harmony. Show them we can coexist, that we're not here to disrupt their way of life." "And how do we do that?" Cass asked, fingers drumming absently on the tabletop. "We'll present them with a gesture of goodwill, something that aligns with their beliefs and rituals." "Like what?" Thorne inquired, skepticism laced through his words. "Music," Sura replied, earning a collective groan from the room. "Not yours," she clarified. "Theirs. We'll use the patterns Rigby's decoded and create something they'll appreciate." Marlowe considered the proposition, weighing the risks and rewards with the care of a seasoned gambler hedging their bets. "All right, let's do it, but if this goes south, we're back to Plan B." "Running like hell?" Thorne asked, a grin on his face. "Exactly," Marlowe confirmed with a nod of grim determination. "Everyone get to work. We've got a planet to convince." As the crew dispersed, the air was thick with anticipation and dread. It was a gamble, a long shot, but in the vast, uncaring stretch of space, sometimes that was all you had. The hours crept by, and as Sura and Rigby worked tirelessly to craft their musical olive branch, Marlowe kept her fingers crossed and her eyes on the stars, hoping they'd live to see another day. And as the Audacity hummed along, ever the brave little toaster in a cosmic wilderness, the crew prepared for their final shot at redemption. The odds were slim, the risks high, but what else was new? It was just another day in the life of Captain Marlowe Vex and her band of not-so-merry misfits. Marlowe stood in the Audacity's cramped bridge, staring at the mess of papers and digital notes Sura had spread across the console. It looked like a conspiracy theorist's dream, or their worst nightmare, depending on your appreciation for chaos. "So, you've got a plan to charm the Xanthians with their own music. Seems like a risky strategy. What if they still hate it?" Marlowe asked, eyebrow raised like a flag of disapproval. Sura grinned, the kind that made you question her sanity. "Well, we've got nothing to lose except maybe our dignity and a couple of limbs. But I think I've found something interesting in their ancient texts." "Interesting? Like this may or may not lead to our doom kind of interesting," Thorne chimed in, leaning against the bulkhead with arms crossed, looking every bit the skeptic. "Exactly," Sura replied, undeterred by Thorne's snark. "The Xanthian archives hint that music was once a revered force among them. Something changed that perception, but the details are sketchy. Maybe Earth music will remind them of the good old days before they turned into cosmic killjoys. Lovely, Cass remarked dryly, still tapping away on her console. So, we're betting our lives on the hope that the Xanthians are just music critics in need of a nostalgia trip, pretty much, Sura confirmed. But there's more. The text suggests that their change in attitude coincided with the discovery of the wormhole temple. Maybe they inadvertently locked something away, something we can unlock. Marlowe's mind raced through the possibilities, most of which ended in some catastrophic failure. All right, so what's our next move, Maestro? We broadcast a selection of Earth's finest tunes, Sura said, her excitement barely contained. But we'll start with something classic, something universally acknowledged as non-offensive. Thorn couldn't help himself. Like what? Space Oddity, Highway to the Danger Zone. Stairway to Heaven, more like Beethoven's Fifth, Sura corrected, rolling her eyes but smirking at Thorn's suggestions. It's got the kind of universal appeal that might not get us immediately vaporized. Because nothing says don't kill us like a deaf composer's existential crisis. Rigby chimed in from the intercom, his voice as dry as the desert sands of Mars. All right, Marlowe interjected, hoping to corral the conversation back to something resembling a plan. Rigby, can you set up the broadcast without alerting them? Rigby's voice crackled back through the speakers. Sure thing, Captain. Just give me a sec to bypass the Xanthian babysitter protocols. Great. And while you're at it, see if you can pirate some of their Netflix too, Thorn added, earning him a round of chuckles. On it, Rigby replied, his tone implying a grin, but no promises on the quality. Marlowe turned to Sura, her expression shifting from tired amusement to something more serious. You're sure this will work? No, Sura admitted, her earlier bravado tempered by uncertainty. But it's a chance. And right now, chance is all we've got. All right then. Let's roll the dice, Marlowe said, steeling herself for what was to come. Cass, you ready with the broadcast controls? Ready as I'll ever be, Cass answered, fingers poised over the console like a pianist at a recital. Good. Let's make some history, or at least avoid becoming it, Marlowe quipped, trying to inject a touch of humor into the tense atmosphere. As the crew got to work, the air in the bridge felt electric, charged with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. They were a ragtag bunch, held together by duct tape and sarcasm, but when it counted, they knew how to pull together. Sura watched as Rigby's algorithms danced across the screen, bypassing the Xanthian blocks with the finesse of a cat burglar at a diamond expo. It was risky, but the kind of risk that could pay off big. Broadcast ready, Cass announced, her voice steady despite the stakes. On your mark, Captain. Marlowe took a deep breath, the kind you take before jumping off a cliff and hoping there's water below. All right, folks. Let's make some noise. Cass hit the button, and Beethoven's Fifth Symphony filled the void of space. A haunting melody carried through the silence like a message in a bottle cast into the cosmic sea. For a moment, nothing happened. Just the hum of the ship and the symphony's strains weaving through the cold, indifferent stars. Well, we're not dead yet, Thorn observed, his voice a mix of relief and disbelief. Then the ship shuddered, and alarms blared as if to prove him wrong. What the hell was that? Marlowe demanded, gripping the edge of the console as if it could save her from whatever fresh disaster they'd stumbled into. Looks like the temple's responding, Cass shouted over the din, eyes glued to the readouts. Something's unlocking or opening or, I don't know, but it's doing something. Great. We've poked the bear and now it's waking up, Marlowe muttered, her earlier optimism all but evaporated. Could be worse, Thorn said with a shrug. Could have been Disco Duck. Not helping, Thorn, Sura snapped, though her lips twitched with a reluctant smile. As the symphony played on, the ship's sensors picked up a shift in the electromagnetic fields surrounding the temple. It was as if the music had indeed unlocked something, a hidden function buried beneath centuries of silence and neglect. Captain, I'm getting some unusual readings, Rigby's voice came through, tinged with excitement. It's like the temple's recalibrating itself. Recalibrating? Marlowe echoed, skepticism laced with curiosity. Is that good or bad? Depends on your definition, Rigby replied, maddeningly vague as always. But it's definitely not nothing. Right. Let's hope it's the good kind of something, Marlowe said, glancing at Sura with newfound respect. Guess your hunch was right after all. Sura nodded, her earlier confidence tempered by the reality of their situation. Maybe, but let's not celebrate just yet. The Xanthians might not appreciate us fiddling with their sacred relics. As if on cue, the communication console lit up, signaling an incoming message from their less-than-friendly neighbors. Incoming transmission from the Xanthians, Cass reported, her fingers dancing over the controls. Looks like they've noticed. Of course they have, Marlowe sighed, rubbing her temples as if to stave off the headache brewing behind her eyes. All right, let's see what they have to say. The view screen flickered to life, displaying a Xanthian emissary, their expression caught somewhere between bewildered and furious, like a cat that's just had a bucket of water dumped on its head. Human vessel, the emissary began, their tone as sharp as a knife edge. You are violating sacred protocols. Cease your activities immediately. Marlowe forced a smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. Apologies, esteemed Xanthian representative. We meant no disrespect. We were merely trying to understand your cultural appreciation for music. The emissary's eyes narrowed, clearly unimpressed by Marlowe's diplomatic overture. Your actions are reckless. You risk awakening forces beyond your understanding. Awakening forces. Like what, a cosmic DJ? Thorne whispered, earning him a swat from Cass. Not the time, Thorne, Marlowe hissed, before returning her attention to their alien counterpart. We only seek to honor your traditions. The Xanthians seem to consider this, their expression softening slightly. Your intentions may be sincere, but the consequences could be dire. Dire is kind of our middle name, Rigby quipped through the comms, earning a chorus of groans from the crew. Look, Marlowe pressed, all we want is to coexist peacefully. No harm, no foul, just a little music appreciation session. The emissary hesitated, their gaze shifting to the side as if consulting with unseen advisors. We will consider your actions, human, but know this, should your interference lead to chaos, we will hold you accountable. With that, the transmission cut off, leaving the crew in an uneasy silence. Well, that went better than expected, Thorne remarked, breaking the tension with his usual irreverence. Considering they didn't immediately vaporize us, Sura replied. I'd call that a win. Let's not get too comfortable, Marlowe warned, though her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. We're still on thin ice here. As the symphony reached its crescendo, the temple's inner workings continued to shift, revealing more of its hidden architecture. It was beautiful in a way, like watching a flower bloom for the first time in centuries. Think we can learn something from all this? Cass asked, her eyes glued to the readouts as they streamed data faster than she could process. Maybe, Rigby admitted. If we can access their archives, we might be able to make sense of it. Marlowe nodded, feeling a spark of hope amidst the chaos. All right, team. Let's see if we can turn this little music session into something worthwhile. As the crew set to work, Marlowe allowed herself a moment to reflect on the absurdity of it all. Here they were, a ragtag bunch of humans trying to make sense of alien culture through music, hoping to avoid a diplomatic disaster. And in that moment, amidst the chaos and uncertainty, Marlowe couldn't help but chuckle. Because when the universe threw you a curveball, sometimes the only thing you could do was swing for the fences and hope for the best. The audacity shuddered again, this time with the enthusiasm of a carnivorous plant on a meat diet. The bridge lights flickered like a cheap motel sign, and Captain Marlowe Vex could practically hear the ship grumbling about the abuse. What the hell is happening? She demanded, as if someone had installed a smooth sailing switch and forgotten to turn it on. Looks like the temple's having a tantrum, Cass reported, her eyes darting over the console as though it was throwing a parade of unpleasant surprises. The readings are off the charts. If we had charts, that is. Great. We've managed to piss off an ancient structure, Thorne remarked, leaning against the bulkhead with all the urgency of a man who knows he's in a sinking ship but refuses to paddle. Music was supposed to tame the beast, Sura muttered, staring at the data as if willing it to make sense. Not poke it with a stick. Well, next time maybe try a lullaby, Rigby chimed in from the engine room, his voice crackling over the intercom. Apparently, Beethoven's not the universal pacifier we thought. The Xanthian's communication console beeped again, as if the universe hadn't already delivered enough bad news for one day. Incoming message, Cass announced, her tone flat but her expression undeniably amused. Wonderful, Marlowe sighed, rubbing her temples. Let's see what the Interstellar Scolding Committee has to say. The view screen blinked to life, the Xanthian emissary's face appearing with all the warmth of a tax collector in a recession. Human vessel, your intrusion has destabilized the sacred wormhole. We demand you cease and desist immediately. Cease and desist, Thorne repeated, eyebrows climbing towards his hairline. Like we're a noisy neighbor and not a spaceship about to be ripped apart. Apologies for the inconvenience, Marlowe said, the false cheer in her voice brighter than a supernova. We're working hard to resolve the situation. Your efforts are insufficient, the emissary snapped back, their expression the perfect blend of disdain and barely contained frustration. You must leave this sector at once. Leave, Marlowe echoed, sharing a look with her crew. And how exactly are we supposed to do that with a wormhole throwing a cosmic temper tantrum? Our concern is not your navigation, the Xanthian replied, their voice as cold as the void outside. Only that you are no longer here to exacerbate the situation. Exacerbate, Rigby laughed, a short bark of amusement. We're about to be exacerbated into atoms. Tell them we'll be gone just as soon as we can scrape ourselves off the nearest celestial body. Look, Marlowe said, her patience wearing thinner than a politician's promise. We're trying to fix this, but it's kind of hard when your damn temple's having a meltdown. The emissary's face remained impassive, as if carved from ice. Failure to comply will result in forcible removal. Are they seriously threatening to throw us out of space? Sura asked, disbelief coloring her words. Sounds about right, Thorne replied, folding his arms over his chest. Guess that's what you get for trying to play DJ at a cosmic concert. Captain, Rigby's voice cut in, more serious now. The wormhole's destabilizing faster than I can say reverse the polarity. Don't even think about it, Rigby, Marlowe warned, though the dark humor in her voice hinted at the desperation lurking beneath. What's our best option? Pray. Hope a miracle drops by. I've got nothing, Rigby admitted, the sound of clanging metal punctuating his words as he worked furiously at the controls. Marlowe turned her attention back to the screen, where the Xanthian emissary waited like a bureaucrat with too much time and not enough empathy. We'll do our best to leave, but we could use a little help here. The emissary's expression remained unchanged, a testament to their species' lack of humor. Your predicament is of your own making, human. We have warned you of the consequences. And yet here we are, Marlowe muttered under her breath, cutting the transmission with an exasperated flick of her wrist. Sura, she said, turning to the woman whose plan had brought them to this precipice. Any ideas? Well, Sura began, lips twitching with a grim smile, we could try singing Kumbaya, but I doubt it'd help. Right. Back to basics then, Marlowe replied. Cass, how's that beacon coming along? I'm cobbling it together with wishful thinking and spare parts, Cass replied, fingers dancing across the console. If we're lucky, it might just hail something friendly. Or something with bigger teeth, Thorne added helpfully. Always the optimist, Thorne, Marlowe said dryly. Rigby, any luck with those alien archives? If by luck you mean confusion and despair, then yes, plenty, Rigby responded. I've managed to crack a bit more of their language, but unless they've got a chapter titled How to Fix a Cosmic Clusterfuck, we're screwed. Good to know we're not completely without options, Marlowe said, sarcasm dripping from each word. The ship lurched again, an ominous groan running through the hull like a warning from the gods. The lights flickered, casting the crew in a strobe-lit nightmare. That's new, Sura observed, gripping the console for support. What now? Now, Marlowe said, determination hardening her features. We buy ourselves some time. Cass, keep that beacon working. Rigby, keep decoding. Sura, see if you can find any other music that might calm the temple. And me? Thorn asked, his usual skepticism tempered by a hint of concern. Stay sarcastic, Marlowe replied with a wry smile. We'll need the humor when we go out in a blaze of glory. As the crew scrambled to their tasks, the tension on the bridge was palpable. They were outgunned, outmatched, and perilously close to being out of time. But if there was one thing Marlowe knew, it was that desperate times called for audacious measures. And if the audacity specialized in anything, it was audacity itself. Captain, Leela, the ship's AI navigator, spoke up for the first time, her voice cool and unflappable amidst the chaos. I've been running projections. The probability of successful escape is not favorable. Thanks for the pep talk, Leela, Marlowe quipped, though there was a dark undercurrent of truth in her words. I aim to inform, not comfort, Leela replied smoothly. But there may be a chance if we can stabilize the temple's reaction. How? Marlowe asked, grasping at any hint of hope. By matching the frequency of the disturbance with a counter-resonance, Leela explained, her tone as crisp as a bureaucratic memo. A musical solution, if you will. A musical solution, Marlowe echoed, shaking her head with disbelief. We're seriously going to try to save ourselves with a song. Seems fitting, Thorn chuckled. We came, we sang, we got obliterated. Not yet we haven't, Marlowe said firmly. Sura, find something, anything that might work. We don't have much time. Sura nodded, her expression shifting from resigned to determined as she sifted through the ship's meager musical library. Let's see. Something calming, something ancient. Maybe Bach. Go for it, Marlowe instructed, her voice carrying the weight of command. Cass, feed it into the system. Let's see if we can soothe the savage wormhole. On it, Cass replied, fingers flying over the keyboard. Let's hope Bach is more palatable than Beethoven. And pray the Xanthians don't have a vendetta against Baroque, Thorn added, his dry wit earning him a glare from Sura. Bach queued up, Cass announced. Ready when you are, Captain. Marlowe took a deep breath, trying to shake off the sense of impending doom that clung to her like a second skin. All right, team, let's make some music. The strains of Bach's air on the G string flowed through the ship, a serene melody weaving through the chaos with a grace that belied the tension on the bridge. Here goes nothing, Marlowe murmured, watching the readouts with a mix of trepidation and hope. As the music played, the temple seemed to stir, its chaotic energies shifting like a storm caught in a lull. The ship's sensors picked up a subtle change in the electromagnetic fields, a whisper of a promise that things might just hold steady. Well, it's not getting worse, Rigby observed, his voice crackling over the intercom. I'd call that progress. Progress is good, Marlowe agreed, though her grip on the console remained white-knuckled. Let's keep it going. For a moment the universe held its breath, and the crew of the Audacity dared to hope that they might make it through in one piece. But hope, like any rare commodity, was fleeting. And in the grand scheme of cosmic forces, a little bit of hope was often not enough. Captain, Leela's voice cut through the quiet, a harbinger of bad news. The Xanthian emissary is hailing us again. Perfect timing, Thorn muttered, rolling his eyes. Just when things were getting interesting. Put them through, Marlowe ordered, steeling herself for another round with their less-than-friendly neighbors. The view screen blinked to life again, the Xanthian emissary's stern visage imposing and unyielding. Human vessel, your attempts are futile. The wormhole is beyond your control. Thank you for the vote of confidence, Marlowe replied, her sarcasm sharper than a knife. We're doing our best here. Your best may not be enough, the emissary warned, their eyes narrowing. Prepare to evacuate or face annihilation. Evacuate to where? Sura asked, incredulous. Into the swirling void of doom outside. Because that sounds like a fun vacation, Thorn added, his voice dripping with irony. The emissary remained impassive, a monument to their species' stubborn adherence to protocol. Your presence is a threat to the stability of this sector. And your helpful pointers aren't exactly stabilizing our hearts, Rigby shot back, his frustration bubbling over. All we want is a chance, Marlowe said, her voice steady despite the looming threat. A chance to make things right. The emissary hesitated, a fleeting moment of indecision crossing their features. If you can stabilize the wormhole, we will reconsider. But time is short, human. The transmission ended, leaving the crew in a silence fraught with tension and resolve. They had one last shot, and it was a long one. "All right, folks," Marlowe said, the weight of command settling on her shoulders like an old friend. "Let's show them what we're made of." As Bach's melody played on, the crew worked with the kind of frenetic energy reserved for those who know they are running out of chances. The temple's energies continued their unpredictable dance, a reminder that their gamble was far from over. But if there was one thing the Audacity had taught them, it was that even in the darkest moments, there was always a chance for a little light to break through. And sometimes, that light was all you needed to find your way home. "Well, color me impressed," Rigby's voice crackled over the intercom, a mix of excitement and disbelief. "Turns out these ancient Xanthian systems aren't just glorified noisemakers. They're actually responding to the music." Marlowe leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the console like it owed her money. "Spit it out, Rigby. How's that help us not get sucked into a cosmic blender?" Apparently, the temple's systems are aligning with the harmonic frequencies of the music. It's like they're, "I dunno, tuning up for a cosmic concert or something," Rigby explained, the sound of frantic typing underscoring his words. "So you're saying Bach is tickling the temple's fancy?" Thorne chimed in, eyebrows raised in a skeptical arch. "I knew we should have tried Metallica." "Less sarcasm, more solutions," Marlowe snapped, though she couldn't help but smirk at the mental image of an interstellar mosh pit. "Rigby, can we use this to stabilize the wormhole?" "In theory, yeah," Rigby said, his voice laced with the cautious optimism of a man who'd been burned too many times before. "But we'll need to tweak the frequencies, match them perfectly with the temple's response. It's like threading a needle while tap dancing on a minefield." Sura looked up from the console where she'd been scouring the ship's music library. "So our fate depends on a perfect pitch. Fantastic. What's plan B? A dance-off?" "Sorry, but my moonwalk's a little rusty," Thorne quipped, earning a dry chuckle from Cass. Marlowe rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of their predicament like an elephant doing the rumba on her skull. "All right, Rigby, keep at it. We need that wormhole stable if we're going to convince the Xanthians to let us live." "Any bright ideas on how to do that?" Cass asked, glancing up from her console with a faint glimmer of hope. "Well, if sweet-talking them doesn't work, I'm open to bribing," Marlowe replied, not entirely joking. "Sura, any updates on the musical front?" Sura shrugged, a gesture of resigned exasperation. "Short of conjuring a celestial iTunes playlist, we're running thin. But I'll keep digging. Maybe there's a golden oldie the Xanthians haven't forgotten." "Let's just hope they're not allergic to nostalgia," Marlowe muttered, turning her attention to the task of convincing an alien species that a ragtag crew of humans could fix a mess of cosmic proportions. The ship shuddered again, a reminder that time was as slippery as Thorne's hold on optimism. "Leela," Marlowe said, addressing the ship's AI, "open a channel to the Xanthian emissary. Let's see if they are in a listening mood." "Channel open," Leela replied, her tone as steady as ever. "Good luck, Captain." "You're going to need it." The viewscreen flickered to life, and there was the Xanthian emissary looking as enthused as a rock in a rainstorm. "Human vessel, you have yet to evacuate. Time is waning." Marlowe forced a smile, the kind that radiated confidence even when you felt like you were juggling knives on a unicycle. "Actually, we've made some progress. Bach seems to have struck a chord with your temple." The emissary's expression didn't change, but Marlowe could have sworn there was a flicker of interest in their eyes. Or maybe it was just the glare from the screen. "Elaborate." "Our scans show that the temple's systems are responding to the music. We think we can stabilize the wormhole by matching the frequencies," Marlowe explained, channeling every ounce of sincerity she could muster. And you propose to do this without causing further disruption? The emissary asked, skepticism thicker than a Xanthian bureaucrat's rulebook. That's the plan, Marlowe replied, her voice laced with determination. But we'll need your cooperation. Let us try to stabilize the wormhole and we might just save all our hides. The emissary was silent for a long moment, the kind of pause that made you sweat like a sinner in church. Your proposal is intriguing. Very well. You have limited time. Succeed or face the consequences. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Marlowe to release a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Well, that was almost a compliment. Progress, Thorne remarked, stretching the word like a piece of gum. Better than a slap in the face. Rigby, how's the needle threading going? Marlowe asked, her voice carrying a renewed urgency. Getting there, Rigby replied, the clatter of keys ringing out like a symphony of caffeine-fueled desperation. Need a bit more time. Time we don't have, Sura muttered, her eyes glued to the console as she scrolled through sheet music like a desperate DJ at a wedding. Hey, if we pull this off, first round's on me, Cass offered, fingers dancing over her controls with a rhythm that was almost musical in itself. Marlowe chuckled, the sound coming out more like a bark. Deal. But let's save the celebrating for when we're not on the brink of becoming space debris. As the crew worked, the strains of Bach continued to flow through the ship, the melody weaving a strange kind of hope into the tense air. Marlowe could only pray that the music wouldn't turn out to be their requiem. Captain, Rigby's voice came over the intercom again, this time with a hint of triumph. I've got the frequencies aligned. Ready to give it a shot. Hit it, Rigby, Marlowe commanded, her heart skipping a beat as she braced for whatever came next. The ship hummed with energy, a vibration that seemed to resonate with the very bones of the Audacity. The temple's energies responded, a dance of light and sound that defied explanation, like a celestial light show set to a concerto. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly the readouts on the console began to shift. The chaotic fluctuations of the wormhole eased, their wild gyrations smoothing into something resembling order. It was working. Holy hell, Cass breathed, staring at the screen as if it might bite her. It's actually stabilizing. Not bad for a bunch of misfits, Thorne quipped, though there was a note of awe in his voice. Rigby, keep those frequencies steady, Marlowe instructed, though she couldn't help the grin spreading across her face. Sura, any sign of trouble? Nothing immediate, Sura replied, her relief palpable. But let's not start a party just yet. Marlowe nodded, her gaze fixed on the view screen as she awaited contact from the Xanthians. If they could see this, maybe there was a chance. It didn't take long for the emissary to appear, their expression a mix of surprise and, dare she say it, respect. Human vessel, you have stabilized the anomaly. Honestly, we're as shocked as you are, Marlowe admitted, unable to resist a wry grin. The emissary inclined their head, a gesture that might have been a nod. You have proven yourselves resourceful. The council will be informed of your actions. You are free to leave. Appreciate it, Marlowe replied, a grin threatening to split her face in two. We'll see ourselves out. As the transmission ended, Marlowe turned to her crew, a sense of triumph washing over her. All right, folks, we're not space dust and we're not stuck in Xanthian jail. I'd call that a win. The bridge erupted in cheers, the tension of the past Iors melting away like ice in a supernova. For the first time in what felt like forever, Marlowe allowed herself to relax, the weight of command lifting just enough for her to breathe. Let's get the hell out of here, she said, a laugh bubbling up in her chest as she gave the order to punch in a course for somewhere far, far away. As the Audacity slipped away from the temple, the strains of Bach still echoed through the ship, a fitting soundtrack for their improbable victory. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't pretty, but it was enough. Because out here, in the vast expanse of space, enough was sometimes all you could ask for. And as far as Marlowe was concerned, it was more than enough to ensure that their story wasn't over just yet. The Audacity shivered through the cosmos like a cat that just remembered it hates water. Marlowe Vex stood on the bridge, pretending that her stomach wasn't twisting itself into a knot that could tie up a cargo ship. The Xanthian emissary might have given them the green light, but it felt more like they'd been handed a stick of dynamite and told not to play with matches. "Okay, everyone," Marlowe said, her voice steady by sheer force of will. "We've got permission to attempt the impossible." "Let's not screw this up, right?" Thorne snorted. "Because when have we ever done that before? Hey, if we're not failing spectacularly, we're not trying hard enough," Cass chimed in, her fingers dancing over her console with the finesse of a pianist trying to play Mozart on a keyboard with half the keys missing. "Keeps things interesting," Sura added, her eyes gleaming with the kind of determination that usually gets you into more trouble than it's worth. Leela, the ship's AI, piped up in her typical deadpan tone. "Captain, given our historical data, the probability of success is approximately—" "Leela, I'm in the middle of a motivational speech," Marlowe interrupted. "Save the odds for the casinos. Sensors are picking up significant fluctuations from the temple," Cass said, ignoring the bickering like the professional she was. "It's definitely responding to the music. We just need to keep the harmony going." "Which is a fancy way of saying we need Bach to play nice with some cosmic stones," Thorne said, eyebrows arched in skepticism that could put a lawyer to shame. "Synchronicity, Thorne," Rigby crackled over the intercom. "Think of it like getting a dozen cats to line dance. We just need to make sure they don't claw each other's eyes out in the process." "Comforting," Thorne replied, sarcasm dripping from the word like grease from a cheap burger. As the strains of Bach wove through the ship, Marlowe marveled at the irony. They were about to save their skins with the very thing that had nearly turned them into cosmic confetti. Somewhere in a parallel universe, she was sure a version of her was laughing her head off at the absurdity of it all. "Leela, open a channel to the Xanthian temple systems," Marlowe commanded, her voice carrying the weight of a captain whose ship was her world. "Channel open," Leela confirmed, the faint hum of the ship's systems a reassuring presence in the tense silence. "All right, Rigby, let's give this thing a proper encore," Marlowe said, the words carrying a spark of hope she hadn't quite dared to feel before. The music swelled, an intricate dance of frequencies that resonated with the temple. The lights on the Audacity dimmed slightly, a cosmic hush falling over the ship as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The temple responded, its systems lighting up in a cascading symphony of color and sound. It was beautiful in the way a thunderstorm is beautiful, wild, untamed, and utterly indifferent to the chaos it left in its wake. "Readouts are stabilizing," Sura reported, her voice barely a whisper over the comms. "We're getting there." "Keep it steady, folks," Marlowe said, her eyes fixed on the display as if her sheer willpower could keep the ship from tearing itself apart. "Feels like we're trying to juggle flaming swords," Cass muttered, though her fingers never faltered. "One wrong move and we all get a haircut we didn't ask for." "Nice visual," Thorne said, rolling his eyes. "Just what I needed, thanks." The ship's systems hummed, a resonance building that was almost tangible. It was like standing on the edge of a precipice, the decision to leap somehow both terrifying and exhilarating. "Captain, the temple's systems are aligning," Rigby announced, his voice crackling with the static of the intercom and a hint of disbelief. "I think it's working." "You think?" Marlowe echoed, her grin a mix of relief and incredulity. "Let's hope the temple agrees." The wormhole, once a chaotic whirl of cosmic indigestion, was now a steady, pulsing circle of light, a beacon in the void that promised passage rather than peril. The crew watched, breathless, as the readouts confirmed what they'd barely dared to hope. "It's holding," Cass said, as if speaking the words too loudly might make them dissolve into nothingness. "All right, folks," Marlowe said, her voice carrying the kind of warmth usually reserved for victory speeches. "Looks like we've managed to keep the universe from ripping us a new one." "Nice work, lucky us," Thorne drawled, though there was a flicker of something in his eyes that spoke of pride. "We didn't even have to sacrifice anyone to the cosmic gods." "Though I was ready to volunteer Thorne if it came to that," Sura quipped, her expression one of mock innocence. "How very thoughtful," Thorne replied, the sarcasm in his voice as thick as the hull of their ship. Marlowe turned her attention back to the view screen, where the Xanthian emissary would no doubt soon appear. It was time to see if their little musical number had earned them the right to leave without a cosmic restraining order. As if on cue, the view screen flickered to life, revealing the Xanthian emissary's familiar, impassive face. "Human vessel, you have managed to stabilize the anomaly." "That we have," Marlowe replied, her grin as irrepressible as a bad habit. "Turns out music really does have charms to soothe the savage wormhole." The emissary inclined their head, a gesture that might have been respect or just a really stiff neck. "Your actions have been noted. The Council acknowledges your unconventional solution." "Unconventional solutions are our specialty," Marlowe said, unable to resist a wink at her crew. "You are free to depart," the emissary continued, their tone as dry as a desert in a drought. "The Council will review the events and determine the appropriate recognition." "Sounds like a party," Thorne muttered under his breath, earning a look from Cass that suggested he'd better keep his mouth shut if he wanted to keep his teeth. "Thank you, emissary," Marlowe said, injecting as much sincerity into her voice as she could muster. "We'll be on our way then." The transmission ended with a click, leaving the bridge in a silence that was as satisfying as the first sip of coffee after a long night's watch. "Well, team," Marlowe said, turning to face her crew, "we've managed to pull off the impossible. Again. And without breaking anything this time," Cass added, her smile as bright as the console lights. "Not for lack of trying," Sura said, though her eyes shone with the thrill of victory. "Let's not stick around to see if the Xanthians tip over into regret," Marlowe advised, her voice light with relief. "Cass, plot a course for somewhere far less dramatic." "Aye, Captain," Cass replied, her hands moving over the controls with the confidence of someone who'd just outrun death and was keen for a little peace and quiet. As the Audacity powered away from the temple, the wormhole a distant memory in their rearview, Marlowe leaned back in her chair and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "First round's definitely on me," Cass declared, a grin splitting her face wide enough to rival the event horizon they'd just escaped. "You buying drinks?" Thorne asked, feigning shock. "This day just keeps getting better." "Don't expect champagne," Sura warned, her voice teasing. "More like something brewed in a rusty barrel." "Whatever it is, it'll taste like victory," Marlowe said, closing her eyes for a moment, savoring the quiet triumph of survival. The strains of Bach faded into the background, the echoes of their unlikely savior leaving a lingering melody that none of them would soon forget. Out here in the endless expanse of the universe, they might have been small, insignificant specks of stardust. But today, they'd rocked the cosmos and lived to tell the tale. And as far as Marlowe was concerned, that was a win worth celebrating. As the Audacity slipped into the depths of space, Marlowe allowed herself a smile. A real one, not the grin of a captain holding her crew together with spit and bravado. They'd done the impossible, defied the odds, and outmaneuvered the universe. And for the first time in a long time, the future looked a little less like an asteroid field and a little more like open skies. "So, where to next, Captain?" Leela asked, the AI voice tinged with something that might have been curiosity. "Somewhere with less music and more sunshine," Marlowe replied, her tone light but resolute. "I think we've earned it." And as the Audacity sailed into the unknown, its crew laughed and planned and dreamed, all of them knowing that tomorrow might bring new challenges, new dangers, new absurdities. But for today, they'd take their victory, however improbable, and hold it close. Because out here in the wild, unpredictable dance of the cosmos, victory was as fleeting as a shooting star, beautiful, bright, and gone before you knew it. And as Captain Marlowe Vex knew all too well, you didn't waste a moment of it. As the Audacity cruised away from the freshly harmonized wormhole, the crew settled into that peculiar post-crisis calm, where everyone pretended the universe wasn't seconds away from turning them into space debris just moments ago. Marlowe Vex, captain and occasional miracle worker, sank into her chair with the grace of someone who'd rather be slouched on a couch, feet up, and preferably intoxicated. "Good work, everyone," she said, the words tasting like victory might if victory came in the form of second-hand air filters and expired rations. "Turns out our cosmic karaoke has its perks." Thorn leaned back, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips like a cat toying with a half-dead mouse. "Didn't think Bach would be our ticket out of becoming universal confetti." "What's next?" "Metallica to negotiate trade deals." "Please, only if we want to start an intergalactic war," Cass chimed in from the console, fingers still dancing over the keys as though the galaxy's greatest threats could be warded off with a well-timed keystroke. "Bach might have saved us, but let's not turn the Audacity into the universe's worst jukebox." The intercom crackled to life, Rigby's voice cutting through with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "Hey, Captain, sensors are picking something up. Looks like the Xanthians are pinging us back." "Figures," Marlowe muttered, rolling her eyes heavenward, or as close as you could get when surrounded by metal and the vast nothingness of space. "Patch them through, Rigby." A moment later, the view screen flickered to life with the Xanthian emissary looking as inscrutable as ever. If inscrutable had a fashion line, the Xanthians would be its poster alien. "Human vessel," the emissary began, voice as dry as the dust on an asteroid. "Your solution, unconventional as it was, has proven effective. The Council has decided to extend an invitation for further cultural exchanges." "Great," Thorn muttered under his breath. "Exchanges, just what we need. Maybe they'll teach us how to look like we swallowed a dictionary." Marlowe shot Thorn a look that promised retribution, or at least a deeply unpleasant duty roster. "We appreciate the offer," she replied aloud, her tone as diplomatic as she could muster. "We'll definitely consider it." The emissary gave a nod that could have been agreement or a particularly stiff wind. "We shall await your response. Until then, may the Harmonies guide your path." "Right," Marlowe said, her smile more a baring of teeth than a friendly gesture. "Till then." The screen blinked off, leaving the crew in another silence that was swiftly filled by Thorn's sardonic drawl. "Cultural exchanges. What's next?" "Teaching Xanthians to line dance." Cass grinned, sliding her chair over with the precision of a seasoned navigator. "Maybe we can introduce them to the wonders of human cuisine. I hear the Xanthians have a real appetite for irony." Sura chuckled from her station, the sound a rare burst of levity, or sarcasm. "We're practically drowning in it." Marlowe shook her head, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. "All right, enough. Let's focus on getting to a place where the only danger is running out of caffeine." "You mean anywhere but here?" Cass asked, her fingers still a blur over the console. "I'm plotting a course for the nearest station, somewhere we can breathe air that doesn't smell like desperation and old socks." "Sounds like paradise," Thorn said. "At this point, I'd settle for a moon with half-decent gravity and a bar." Rigby's voice cut in again, the intercom crackling with faint amusement. "Just keep us pointed in the right direction, Captain. I'd rather not test our luck with any more cosmic anomalies." "Yeah, we've had enough of those to last a lifetime," Marlowe replied, casting a fond glance around the bridge. "But maybe it's time we start looking at the universe a bit differently." The crew exchanged glances, the unspoken agreement lingering in the recycled air. They were explorers, wanderers, a ragtag group that had somehow made harmony out of chaos. Maybe they weren't just surviving out here. Maybe they were meant to thrive. As the Audacity sped toward their next destination, Marlowe leaned back, allowing herself a moment of reflection, a rare luxury in the relentless pace of their lives. "Hey, Captain." Cass's voice broke the silence, her curiosity a habitual undercurrent. "Yeah. Think the universe appreciates our taste in music." Marlowe chuckled, shaking her head. "I think the universe has a lot more to worry about than our playlists, but who knows? Maybe we'll start a trend." "Great," Thorn sighed, feigning exasperation. The crew of the Audacity, cosmic trendsetters. Next stop, trendsetting on the galactic scale. Sura raised an eyebrow, her expression as dry as desert dust. "Let's just make sure the next trend doesn't involve us being consumed by a black hole." "Always the optimist," Marlowe quipped, though her eyes sparkled with a warmth that belied her words. As they settled into the routine of a ship once more on course, there was a sense of quiet camaraderie, a shared understanding that they were part of something bigger, something that defied the odds. The universe was vast, unpredictable, and often downright hostile, but in their little corner aboard the Audacity, they'd carved out a place where they could laugh in the face of danger and somehow come out the other side. In the end, Marlowe mused, it's all about the journey, isn't it? Cass nodded, her fingers pausing as she met Marlowe's gaze. And the music. Don't forget the music. Wouldn't dream of it, Marlowe replied, the grin spreading wide across her face. They might not have conquered the universe, but they'd survived it, danced to its tune, and emerged stronger for it. Whatever came next, whatever new worlds awaited them, they'd face it together, with all the irreverence and tenacity they could muster. The Audacity's engines hummed a steady rhythm, the ship slipping through the stars like a comet with attitude. And as the crew laughed and planned their next escapade, Marlowe knew that come what may, they were ready. Because in the grand, chaotic dance of the cosmos, it wasn't about the destination. It was about the adventure, the one they'd chosen to face together, with music, laughter, and just a touch of madness.